Hi, thank you for tuning in. We kick off this week discussing a little bit about what's been happening in Laikipia. I'm sure a lot of you have watched the news reports or read the publications about the invaders of big ranches in Laikipia. I'll be sharing some of my thoughts about that in this episode. If you're watching On Land in Kenya, I'm Solomon Wangwe. So, what do we make of what's happening in Laikipia? I'm sure most of you have read about what happened. A group of grazers from the Maasai and Turkana community, I think some reports have even stated many are Samburu, have invaded a number of big ranches in Laikipia. And most recently, sadly, one of the ranch owners was gunned down on his property while he was patrolling it. Understandably, this causes a lot of tension with regards to security. A lot of people are concerned about how it may negatively impact the tourist or the tourism industry in that part of the country, and more so for people like us with regards to investing in land. So, what is one supposed to do? Well, I think the first thing we should do is just clarify the facts, because a lot of people, we've gotten a lot of questions even from our customers in the diaspora who are concerned about investing in Nanyuki or Laikipia in general because of the perceived threat to property ownership based on what's happened. So here's my take. I think first and foremost, you have to take a sober look at things and understand history with regards to land ownership in these places, which I might add at this point is completely different from what's happening in Baringo, where we've heard of similar skirmishes with regards to access to land and so on. Laikipia is a completely different scenario, given that violence and potential loss of life is a reality in both locations. So in Laikipia, majority of Laikipia is actually owned by descendants of white settler farmers from Kenya's colonial days. And while this is a very emotive issue, understandably, I, for one, like to take a sober approach. We've heard of people say things like, they should go back to their countries, give us back our land was stolen, this, that, and the other. I think, first and foremost, that's an incredibly insensitive thing to say to the current owners of these big ranches. Firstly, because many of them are Kenyan citizens by birth, right? Are you going to revoke their citizenship even though they are citizens by natural birth? You can't do that. This is privately owned land, and contrary to what is peddled out there, especially by politicians, especially during the electoral cycle, none of these lands were stolen from locals. A lot of these areas were owned by the Maasai community and similar ethnic groups that predominantly were pastoral, and many of them migrated over very large distances to graze their cattle. So while we could say things about the land was stolen from who? The land belonged to everyone. Still does in very many respects today. Even though you may have a title deed to a property, the truth is the natural resource belongs to everyone in common as the Kenyan community. And this is why you get title deeds produced and enforced by the Kenyan government, which is an entity that represents the interests of the Kenyan people. But let me not get too philosophical about it. The fact remains is there's been loss of life and a perceived threat to security and potential harmful effects to very viable industry of tourism in that part of the country. But unless you understand history and appreciate the facts and take a humane view on these things, all you'll do is inflame people. And in my view, as a land investor, deny yourself the opportunity to create wealth even in times of perceived upheaval. Incidentally, if you study history, the world's greatest fortunes were always made in times of unrest an upheaval. So I tend to have a very different view from what you'll hear out there. So granted, someone lost their life, which is sad and wrong. And rightfully so, the government has taken real steps to apprehend the suspects and prosecute them according to the law. And I pray that they do for the sake of justice for the family that has lost their loved one, and more so for the damage that's been done to their property. So that's the first thing. Appreciate the facts, understand the history, and the rest will be fairly simple to sort out. I should also say that one of the keys to understanding what's happening is knowing that the communities that are invading private ranches are not looking for land. Their relationship to land is very different from my relationship to land. As a city-born individual, I'm not from a pastoral community. I come from a very different background. These communities own everything in common. They share everything, and it's cultural. It's part of their culture. They really don't care about the land. They understand the land belongs to someone else. But put yourself in their shoes for a moment. We've gone through a very long period of drought and lack of rainfall. And northern Kenya has been hit more than any other part of the country. And you have dwindling livestock populations, which affects their income, which affects their diets, and ultimately their health and life in very many cases. So picture this, you've traveled from Isiolo or Samburu with your 100 heads of cattle, and you're looking for grazing fields, and you happen upon this fairly lush looking place relative to where you're from that has lots of grass and greenery and shrubbery for your livestock to feed on. And it doesn't seem to be a land that's used by anyone. Fine, it's fenced, in many cases by electricity fences, but there's no one in sight. There's no one living there. And I may understand that the land belongs to someone, but you're not using the grass. And this is the general attitude with these communities. You own the land, we don't want the land. We're not trying to settle on your land or dispossess you of your land. Just give us grazing for our cattle, which we rely on for our livelihoods. You're not using the grass, so what's the problem? It sounds a bit simplistic, but it is in fact the case. And I would say that a lot of the big ranch owners in Laikipia have understood these cultural dynamics and have made space or room within their properties for this to be accommodated. Case in point, Lewa Conservancy, which I'm fairly well acquainted with because, you know, my family and I have had the pleasure of holidaying in Lewa. One of the things I was shocked to find as we were doing a game drive one day is a large herd of cattle with young Maasai, herdsmen and herdsboys watching over their cattle in this giant field where not too far away there were lion and buffalo and elephant. And naturally I was concerned for their safety, but our tour guide, our driver, explained to us that no, in Lewa we've created corridors within the 63,000 or so acre ranch where the local community members can freely access to graze their livestock. Because we have enough space, they understand how to deal with the wildlife. They never poach the wildlife. They respect the wildlife more than most of us do. All they need is access to the grazing lands. And so in those particular ranches, we never hear of issues because they have adequately and humanely addressed the real need for the local communities to support their livestock and keep them healthy because it affects their well-being as well. In some of the cases we've heard of, in northern Laikipia especially, which by the way is a very different case in Nanyuki town, places where there's fairly dense population. We're talking about massive ranches, 20, 40, 100,000 acre ranches, which are impossible to police unless you're dealing with government-sized resources. It's impossible to police land that size that you're not inhabiting in totality, where grazing has been denied to these community members. It's only natural that they would vandalize fences to gain access to the grazing fields. And in the event that you do attack or try to drive them off, they would defend themselves. I'm not justifying what happened to the gentleman who was murdered on his property. What I'm saying is there needs to be a holistic engagement and a mutual respect as human beings for each other's needs, so that we know how to manage this precious resource we call land and everything it has to offer for everyone's benefit. So these are just my thoughts about what's happening, and I'll just close by saying that while some may see that as a risk too high to make their investments in those areas, I actually think it's the best time to consider investing in places like these, just from an investor point of view, right? So if someone for some reason doesn't want to be on their property anymore because they perceive a certain risk to themselves, chances are I can get a good deal for the property that they want to sell, right? I'm not saying that you invade their land and take it over from them. That's not only illegal, it's immoral. But what I'm saying is it's a good time to look out for opportunities to make very nice acquisitions at decent prices because of what's happening in the area. Should that be the case, should that particular property owner want to sell, I wouldn't run away because of what happened 50, 60, 100 kilometers away, because Laikipia covers millions of acres. If you search that out for yourself, and what's happening in northern Laikipia is very segregated to that part of Laikipia. It's not happening everywhere, so it would be foolish for anyone really to make a blanket decision about investing in Laikipia in general because what's happening in a very small pocket. So that would be my encouragement to those of you who are concerned about making investments in land in places that are going through these kinds of issues. As I said before, what's happening in Baringo is completely different, politically motivated, and that needs to be dealt with according to the law by all the stakeholders led by the government agencies, and I would have a different view on that, which I can share about later. So don't deny yourself the opportunity to make viable investments based on ignorance because you had something reported in the news. Do your own research, understand what's going on the ground, and then you can make an informed decision. And I think we would all be the better for it. I hope that helps. If you have any questions or comments you'd like to share about this, please feel free to reach out. I especially invite all of you to subscribe to this channel and send us your specific questions because it helps us address things that are important to you. In the next few weeks, a month or two maybe, we're looking to invite very specific experts in very specific fields related to land investment and land acquisition who can help answer some of these questions. So don't be shy. Send your any questions or your comments. If you don't have any questions, we'll be happy to engage with you on that level. Check out our Facebook page. Our website is up and running. You can even give us a call if you want, 0700010001. Again, that's 0700010001. You've been watching Own Land in Kenya. I'm Solomon Wangwe, and stay tuned for more information on strategic land investment.